The divorce papers weren't even dry when I found myself scrolling through Craigslist at 3 a.m., desperate to find a new place to live. Sarah had kept the house, fair enough, considering it was her family's money that paid for the down payment. But that left me, a 34-year-old technical writer with a newfound addiction to late-night takeout, desperately seeking housing in Portland's increasingly expensive rental market. That's when I saw Marcus's listing. The photos caught my eye first. A converted industrial space in the Pearl District with the kind of aesthetic that usually came with a price tag I couldn't afford even before the divorce. Exposed brick walls stretched up to 14-foot ceilings, and massive factory windows flooded the space with natural light. The kind of place that would typically rent for triple what Marcus was asking. The listing had an unusual caveat: seeking professional roommate. Must maintain complete silence during daylight hours. Ideal for remote workers. No smokers, no pets, no visitors without prior arrangement. I had just landed a remote position with a tech company in Seattle, and silence during the day sounded perfect. After a decade of working in noisy open offices, the thought of peaceful solitude was incredibly appealing. I sent Marcus a message, trying not to sound too desperate. His response came within minutes, despite it being well past midnight. Available to show apartment tomorrow at 8 p.m. Must be after sunset. No exceptions. The next evening, I found myself standing outside a renovated textile mill, its red brick facade illuminated by artfully placed spotlights. The security guard in the lobby checked my ID against a list, then directed me to the freight elevator. A gorgeous piece of industrial history with brass fittings and a manual gate that slid with a satisfying clang. Marcus was waiting by the apartment door when I stepped off the elevator. He was tall and lean, with sharp Germanic features and pale skin that seemed to glow under the hallway lights. His black turtleneck and wireframe glasses gave him the look of a European art curator rather than a medical professional. "Welcome," he said, his accent subtle but distinct. "Please come in." The apartment was even more impressive in person. The main living space was essentially one large room, divided into zones by thoughtfully placed furniture. The kitchen featured professional-grade stainless steel appliances, and a spiral staircase led to a mezzanine level that contained the bedrooms. "I work nights at Providence Portland Medical Center," Marcus explained as he showed me around. "I'm a cardiac surgeon, which means irregular hours and emergency calls. I sleep during the day, hence the silence requirement." He paused, studying my face. "Most potential roommates find this arrangement challenging." "Actually, it sounds perfect," I said. "I just started working remotely, and I need quiet to focus. Plus, I'm going through a divorce, so I'm not exactly in a social butterfly phase." Something flickered across Marcus's face at the mention of divorce. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition. Yes. Endings can be difficult, but they often lead to new beginnings. He gestured to the empty bedroom. "The room is furnished, as you can see. The bathroom is en suite, and you'd have full use of the kitchen and living area in the evenings." The bedroom was minimalist but elegant. A queen-sized bed with charcoal gray linens, a desk position to take advantage of the city view, and built-in shelving along one wall. The bathroom was surprisingly luxurious, with a rainfall shower and heated floors. "The rent seems low for a place like this," I ventured. Marcus's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. "The building belongs to a medical research foundation I work with. They prefer to rent to healthcare professionals, but they've made an exception in this case." He paused. "There is one other thing. Occasionally, I need to use the apartment for emergency consultations with colleagues. These are rare but can happen late at night. Would this be an issue?" I shook my head. "As long as I can stay in my room or get advance notice to make other arrangements, it's fine." "Excellent." Marcus extended his hand. "When can you move in?" I moved in 3 days later, timing it with Marcus's work schedule so I wouldn't disturb his sleep. The first few weeks were practically perfect. I'd wake up around 7 a.m., make coffee in the gleaming kitchen, and work at my desk while sunlight streamed through the enormous windows. Marcus would return from his shift around 6 a.m., disappear into his room, and emerge again at sunset, dressed impeccably in dark colors and carrying a leather medical bag that looked like an antique. We developed an easy rhythm of non-interaction. Marcus kept his food in a separate mini-fridge in his room, though I rarely saw him eat. He was meticulously clean, and the apartment always seemed spotless despite my never seeing him clean. The only evidence of his presence was the occasional sound of running water from his bathroom and the faint scent of something medicinal that sometimes lingered in the air when I woke up. Then came the first text message. Need apartment tonight for emergency consultation. Multiple colleagues attending. Please remain in room or make alternative arrangements until 3 a.m. minimum. Will compensate for inconvenience. It was already 6 p.m., and I had deadlines to meet. Finding somewhere else to go on short notice seemed like more hassle than it was worth, so I replied that I'd stay in my room. Marcus's response was immediate. Thank you. Important. Use noise-canceling headphones. Medical discussions can be intense. Around 8 p.m., I heard the elevator's distinctive clang, followed by multiple sets of footsteps and the sound of equipment being rolled across the hardwood floors. Voices murmured in the living room, speaking too softly for me to make out words. I put on my headphones and tried to focus on work. The first unusual sound penetrated my headphones around 10 p.m., a low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. I couldn't make out the words, but something about the cadence made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It reminded me of Gregorian chants, but with a discordant quality that felt wrong somehow. I turned up my music and tried to ignore it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I removed one earphone, and that's when I heard the beeping, like medical equipment, but with an irregular pattern that didn't match any heart monitor I'd ever heard in hospitals. The beeping would speed up, then slow down, then stop entirely before starting again at a different rhythm. Around midnight, the chanting changed. Now I could make out what sounded like Latin phrases, spoken in unison by multiple voices. The beeping had been joined by a deep, resonant humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The combination made me feel dizzy, almost nauseous. At 2 a.m., I needed to use the bathroom. I tried to time it between chants, not wanting to disturb whatever was happening downstairs. When I turned off my bathroom fan, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A wet, slapping sound, like meat being thrown against metal, followed by a gurgling noise that couldn't possibly have come from any medical equipment I knew of. I didn't sleep that night. The sounds continued until precisely 3 a.m., when they stopped as abruptly as they'd begun. I heard the elevator a few minutes later, then silence. The next morning, the apartment was immaculate. No sign of medical equipment, no furniture out of place. Marcus was already in his room. The only evidence anything had happened was a faint, metallic smell in the air that reminded me of copper and something else I couldn't quite identify. Life returned to normal for the next 2 weeks. Marcus maintained his usual schedule, and I tried to convince myself that what I'd heard had been some kind of advanced medical procedure, perhaps something experimental that required chanting for timing or rhythm. It sounded absurd even in my head, but it was better than the alternatives my imagination conjured up. Then came another text. Emergency consultation tonight. More complex procedure. Strong recommendation to make alternative arrangements. This time, I made plans to stay with a friend. But as I was leaving the apartment building, my car wouldn't start. The security guard called a mechanic, but they couldn't come until morning. By the time I made it back upstairs, it was already past 8 p.m. I opened the apartment door to find the entire living room covered in thick plastic sheeting. 3 people in surgical scrubs and black masks stood around something on the floor, something that was moving. In the split second before they noticed me, I saw tubes running from the figure on the floor to what looked like medical equipment, but none of it looked like any medical devices I'd ever seen. Marcus's head snapped up, and for a moment, his eyes met mine. They were different somehow, darker, with an odd reflective quality like a cat's eyes in headlights. Then one of the masked figures lunged toward me with surprising speed. I ran. The elevator was too slow, so I took the stairs, nearly falling in my haste. I could hear footsteps behind me, but I didn't look back. I made it to the lobby and ran straight to the security desk, gasping out a request to call the police. By the time the police arrived, the plastic sheeting was gone, and the apartment looked normal. Marcus, now wearing a casual sweater instead of scrubs, smoothly explained that he and some colleagues had been practicing new surgical techniques on medical mannequins. The plastic, he said, was to protect the floors from the synthetic blood they used in training. "We apologize for frightening you," he said, his accent somehow more pronounced than usual. "Medical simulations can appear quite realistic. Perhaps we should have warned you more explicitly." The police seemed satisfied with his explanation, but I wasn't. I'd seen the figure on the floor move, and medical mannequins don't need tubes running into them. Plus, there was something about the way the other masked figures had remained completely silent throughout the police interview, standing perfectly still in the kitchen like elaborate statues. I moved out the next day, leaving most of my furniture behind. Marcus didn't ask for additional rent or try to stop me. He just watched me pack with those strange, reflective eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Endings can be difficult," he said as I was leaving, echoing his words from our first meeting. "But they often lead to new beginnings." A week later, safely installed in a small but normal apartment across town, I decided to do some research. I called Providence Portland Medical Center and asked about Dr. Marcus Weber, the name he'd used on our lease. They had no record of him. I tried other hospitals in the area. Nothing. The Medical Research Foundation he'd mentioned didn't seem to exist either, at least not under any name I could find. I considered going to the police again, but what would I say? That my ex-roommate and his friends held mysterious medical consultations involving chanting and strange equipment? That I'd seen something moving under plastic sheeting? That his eyes reflected light oddly? I'd sound insane. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I hear that rhythmic chanting in my dreams. And occasionally, when I pass hospitals at night and see lights on in forgotten corners, I wonder if there are more people like Marcus out there, performing their own private consultations in the dark. I've developed new habits since moving out. I don't look for apartments on Craigslist anymore. I avoid the Pearl District entirely. And most importantly, I never, ever schedule medical procedures after sunset. But there's one thing that still bothers me, one detail I can't shake. A week after I moved out, I was reading a news article about unexplained disappearances in Portland over the past year. Most were dismissed as typical for a large city, people moving without telling anyone, running away from problems, starting new lives elsewhere. But all of them had one thing in common. Their last known locations were within a few blocks of my old apartment building. The article mentioned that several of the missing people had recently gone through divorces or major life changes. Just like I had. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my car had started that night, or if I'd never gone back upstairs. But mostly, I wonder about that moving figure under the plastic sheeting, and whether they were someone else who had been looking for a fresh start, only to find something very different in that beautiful apartment with its massive windows and exposed brick walls. The police never followed up on my report, and the building's security guard didn't remember anything unusual about that night. The only evidence I have is the lingering scent of copper that sometimes appears in my dreams, along with the sound of Latin chanting and that arrhythmic beeping that never quite matched a human heartbeat. After all, as Marcus said, endings can be difficult, but some endings are more difficult than others. That's all for today's creepy story. If you enjoyed this tale of mysterious roommates and dark secrets, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when I upload new content. Let me know in the comments what you think was really happening in that apartment. Was Marcus really a doctor? What were those strange rituals? And what do you think happened to all those missing people? A huge thanks to everyone who's already subscribed and supported the channel. Stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next video.